Here are a few tips and tricks for painting your car. We're going to look at two cars here. One of them does not have the wheels on it and the other one does. So I'll give you some ideas of what to do with each of them. We'll start with the one without the wheels. So this is the ideal way to do it because it's easier to paint without the wheels on it, but don't worry, you still can paint your car if it has the wheels. If it doesn't have the wheels, the first thing you want to do is consider sanding. If you've cut your wood and it has some rough surfaces on it, the paint will adhere better if it's sanded. So you can just get some regular sandpaper and sand. Now, one of the things that helps sanding is to have a backing to the sandpaper. So usually I'll take a piece of wood like this and we just make a little sanding block. And then you can use that to sand your wood. Now, you can sand it as smooth as you like. You can sand the edges like this. Okay, and you can see how smooth they get. There are some areas that you might want to sand that are not square, like this. These, for example. If you want to do that, you can just take a dowel rod and wrap your sandpaper in the dowel rod and sand. If the dowel rod's too big or you don't have one, you can use a marker. So I'll use a marker for this one. And this allows us to sand right in those areas. And you can just feel it to see if it's ready to go. Okay? Once you've finished all your sanding, then you'd be ready to paint. Once you finish sanding, brush off the dust on the piece of wood so it doesn't have any little bits stuck on there. You want a nice clean surface for when you're going to paint. So this one is ready to paint. This one is also ready to paint because it was painted previously and we're just putting another layer on. Alright, if you're going to paint the one without the wheels, you want to start with the bottom. So you're going to turn it over and you're going to paint the bottom first. When you paint, we have acrylic paints and we also have paint pens. Acrylic paints look like this on the palette and we can mix the colors and paint it on. These are what the paint pens look like. Okay? If you're going to use paint pens, you want to wait until the acrylic paint is dry before you use them, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. But say, for example, I'd like to paint the bottom of this piece green. I can use any of these brushes to do that. Okay? There's some that are flat like this and longer and rounded. Some are a little softer. What you don't want to use is this brush. These brushes in the studio are watercolor brushes or glaze brushes, and they're real fluffy, and they don't have a strong enough bristle to hold the acrylic paint. So we don't want to use those, but we can use any of these. And since I'm painting a larger area, I'm going to pick the bigger one. I got my paint on the palette. I don't need a lot of paint for this, okay? And I'd like to mix a green, so I'm going to scoop up some yellow and put it right here. A little bit of blue, because blue is a strong color. And I'm going to mix it together. Alright, so I've painted that and I can set it aside to dry because I don't want to paint the other side until this is dry. Now for this one. Once you've painted this side and it's dry, then you can paint the back. When it's dry, you can turn it over and it won't stick to the table. I'm going to take the blue and I'm going to paint blue here, and I'm going to do a little mixing on the car because I want the blue to blend with the green. And now I have this color going from blue to green. All right, I'm going to set this one aside to dry. Now, if you are painting your car and it already has wheels on it, things are going to look a little different for you. You can't paint as easily around those wheels because the wheels are there, but you do have to be careful about your detail. So we want to go in here and we want to do our painting on this car and avoid the wheels. Now there's a couple ways to think about it. One way is to paint around the wheel and leave the wood open around. We're going to pretend that this is just plain wood. This is already painted silver, but we can just pretend that that's plain wood. I'm going to go ahead and take red and paint this red. And what I can do, if I already have wheels on my car, is I can paint around the wheel well like this, avoiding that space, because if you paint on the wheel and it dries, your wheels are not going to spin very fast. Another thing you can do, if you want the paint to be closer to the wheel, you can take a much smaller brush like this and you go in there, and as best you can you'll hold the wheel away from the car like that. See, there's a gap there, and you'll take a small brush and go inside that wheel well. When you let it dry, if it's sitting on the paint like this, it's going to get stuck. So you have to kind of make sure that wheel is sticking out and set down to dry like that so that it doesn't get stuck. Okay? So that's a way to deal with painting when you've got the wheels on your car. Okay, and then the last step is your detail work. So I let this dry, and this one is dry also. You can see that we've got that progression going from the green to the blue. All right, I'm going to do the detail work on this one just to show you. You can use a very small paintbrush to add details. You can also use a paint pen. So we have these paint pens. These are oil-based, so please be very careful with them. They do not come out of clothing ever. All right, keep the lid on and shake them up a little. Then you can take the lid off. To get the paint flowing, you can press it down on a piece of paper a few times like this. You can see it starts to flow. And then you can start with your detail. So say, for example, I decide I want some flames on the end of my car here. I can use this paint pen to draw in my detail. You can see the paint pens are pretty wet. They do take a while to dry, so you want to let them sit for a bit before you touch them. Probably going to take a couple hours for that paint pen to dry. All right, if you want to add more detail, you just go ahead and do that. Just be careful that you don't touch the area you've already worked on. So the paint pens can offer you all kinds of options. And remember, you can decorate the sides if you want. Just be careful not to touch what you've done already. Maybe I want to put an accent on the wheel well with a paint pen, and that can work that way. Like that. All right, so paint pen is a great option. Just make sure that you always have the lid closed when you shake it up, and then when you're finished you return the lid carefully, and also know that it does not come out of your clothing or your skin It washes off eventually, but it doesn't come out right away. So just be careful with those paint pens. All right, and have fun decorating your car.